1 week after the shocking assassination of Charlie Kirk, the nation gathered for a farewell unlike any other. The funeral, held in Arizona, was already expected to be historic, a blend of grief, politics, and faith. But what stunned the world was not the presence of dignitaries or the flags flown at half-staff. It was the raw, powerful tributes delivered by his father and his sister. Their words, unfiltered and unforgettable, became the defining moment of the service. The assassination and its aftermath. Charlie Kirk's funeral was the culmination of a week of shock and mourning that began on September 10, 2025. On that day, during a scheduled speaking engagement at Utah Valley University, Kirk was killed by a single rifle shot fired from a rooftop. The gunman, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson of Washington, Utah, was apprehended within hours. Investigators later confirmed DNA evidence, a destroyed note suggesting premeditation, and a digital trail linking Robinson directly to the attack. The assassination immediately generated nationwide headlines. Major news networks suspended regular programming to provide wall-to-wall coverage. Prominent political figures, including former President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, released public statements condemning the act.
So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. And hell, call their employer.
Elon Musk used his platform on X to denounce political violence and call for accountability. Public vigils were organized within hours of the shooting. At Utah Valley University, students constructed a makeshift memorial of flowers, photographs, and handwritten messages. Across the country, gatherings took place in churches, town squares, and community centers. Flags were ordered to half-staff nationwide as a sign of respect, reflecting a broad recognition of Kirk's influence on American political discourse. For Kirk's immediate family, the week between the assassination and the funeral was marked by privacy and silence. His wife, Erica, shared only a brief social media post citing scripture. His parents and sister remained absent from public view. Their decision not to speak added to the anticipation surrounding the funeral, where their voices would be heard for the first time. By the time the service was prepared, the event had taken on national significance. It was not only a family's farewell, but also a moment of collective reflection for supporters and critics alike. The nation in mourning. In the days following Charlie Kirk's assassination, the United States entered a period of visible mourning. The incident was covered continuously on television and across digital platforms, with daily updates on the investigation, the suspect's custody, and preparations for the funeral. Public reaction was immediate and widespread.
Versus hate speech, following the killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk.
Vigils were organized in major cities including Phoenix, Dallas, and Chicago, often drawing hundreds of participants. Attendees lit candles, held up American flags, and carried placards with messages such as "Justice for Charlie" and "End political violence." At Utah Valley University, where the shooting occurred, students and faculty created a memorial that grew steadily throughout the week. Flowers, photographs, and handwritten letters filled the entrance to the campus auditorium, serving as a focal point for grief and reflection. Government actions reinforced the solemnity of the moment. Flags were lowered to half-staff nationwide, and statements of condolence came from both political allies and opponents. The president issued a formal message calling the assassination a reminder of the fragile line between democratic debate and destructive violence. Congressional leaders, governors, and mayors across the country echoed similar sentiments. Faith communities also responded. Churches held prayer services dedicated to Kirk's family, and pastors incorporated the event into sermons, emphasizing the need for unity and peace. Online, hashtags connected to Kirk's death trended for days.
To fire or suspend workers over social media posts that ranged from criticism of Kirk to support for his death,
drawing both expressions of sympathy and debates about the broader implications of the tragedy. By the end of the week, the sense of mourning had moved from spontaneous gatherings to a collective anticipation of the funeral itself. The service was viewed as not just a private family event, but as the nation's opportunity to witness tributes that would frame Kirk's legacy for years to come. The funeral setting and atmosphere. Charlie Kirk's funeral was staged with both the weight of a national tragedy and the intimacy of a family farewell. The venue in Arizona was arranged to reflect solemnity above all else. At the center of the hall stood the casket, draped with the American flag, flanked on both sides by tall displays of white lilies and roses. Soft lighting illuminated the front of the stage, while hymn music played quietly in the background, setting a tone of reflection rather than performance. The seating reflected the blend of personal and public. The first rows were reserved for immediate family, his wife Erica, their children, his parents, and his sister. Just behind them sat extended family members, longtime friends, and church leaders. Political figures occupied seats farther back, a symbolic choice that ensured the day remained a family-centered service. Among them were the vice president, several governors, and members of Congress, their presence underscoring the broader impact of Kirk's work. Security was highly visible, an unavoidable reminder of the violence that had led to the funeral. Uniformed officers stood at the entrances, while plainclothes agents were positioned discreetly throughout the hall. Outside, streets were lined with mourners holding candles, banners, and American flags. Crowds gathered quietly, some praying, others simply standing in silence, united by grief. The overall atmosphere was heavy, marked by long moments where the entire hall seemed frozen. Every cough, every shuffle of feet echoed through the silence. Attendees described the setting as unbearably still, a reflection of both the shock of Kirk's death and the anticipation of what his family would say. The stage was not only prepared for ritual, but also for tributes that would define how the nation remembered him. The father's tribute begins. When the time came for family members to speak, the first to step forward was Charlie Kirk's father. Until this moment, he had remained entirely silent in public, declining interviews and avoiding statements throughout the week. His appearance at the podium was therefore anticipated as the first direct glimpse into how the family was processing their loss. The setting emphasized his words. Behind him stood the casket draped in the flag, framed by white flowers and subdued lighting. The audience remained completely still, with cameras trained forward but flashes deliberately muted to preserve the solemn atmosphere. His delivery was measured, his tone steady but heavy with the strain of grief. He began by describing Kirk not as a public figure, but as a son. He spoke of his childhood in Arizona, of his curiosity, and of his determination that had been evident even at a young age. These personal details contrasted sharply with the headlines that had dominated the past week, reminding the audience that before he was a controversial activist and national figure, Kirk had been a child in a family that loved him. Observers noted that the tribute was less about politics than about values. His father emphasized themes of faith, conviction, and resilience, framing Kirk's life in terms of family lessons rather than ideological battles. This perspective gave the service a depth beyond political commentary, grounding it in the universal experience of parental grief. End quote. Tonight, TV, Daya. The father's words established the emotional foundation of the funeral. It was not a rally, nor a spectacle, but a memorial where the family's pain took precedence over public discourse. His tribute signaled to the audience, both in the hall and across the nation, that the day was about humanity before history. The father's core message. As his remarks continued, Charlie Kirk's father moved from personal memories to a broader message that resonated across the audience. His central theme was that his son's life should not be defined solely by the circumstances of his death. Instead, he urged those present to focus on the convictions, discipline, and sense of purpose that Kirk carried throughout his career and personal life. He highlighted Kirk's persistence from a young age, describing how his determination had guided him to pursue a path that blended faith and public engagement. According to his father, this was not merely a political mission, but a reflection of the values instilled at home: hard work, accountability, and service. By presenting his son in this light, he framed Kirk's public role as an extension of the lessons taught within the family household. Another striking element of the father's message was his caution against anger and retaliation. He acknowledged the emotions of grief and outrage, but emphasized that allowing those emotions to dominate would betray the principles his son had stood for. Instead, he called for unity and perseverance, encouraging supporters to continue Kirk's mission constructively rather than destructively. The message was not delivered as a political directive, but as a plea for perspective. It reminded the audience that the assassination was not only a national incident, but a family's loss, and that the response should reflect dignity rather than division. Observers later noted that this part of his tribute gave the funeral its defining tone, solemn, instructive, and focused on long-term legacy rather than immediate reaction. The father's core message transformed his tribute from a personal farewell into a statement that resonated on a national scale, shaping how Kirk's death would be remembered. The father's final farewell. In the final section of his tribute, Charlie Kirk's father turned his focus back to the immediate moment. He addressed the family directly, thanking his daughter-in-law Erica for her strength, and acknowledging the grandchildren who would now grow up with memories shaped more by stories than by experiences with their father. His words underscored the personal cost of the tragedy, moving the service away from public reflection and back to the intimate loss at its core. He then shifted to his son's legacy. With deliberate phrasing, he asked the audience to remember Kirk as a man whose commitment to his beliefs remained unwavering, regardless of whether one agreed or disagreed with him. Conviction, he emphasized, was the defining feature of his life. By anchoring the farewell in this quality, he avoided political rhetoric and instead highlighted a characteristic that resonated across divides. The moment that followed was among the most memorable of the entire service. Before leaving the podium, he paused and placed his hand briefly on the casket. The gesture was not dramatized or extended, but simple and deliberate, symbolizing a father's last act of connection with his son. Cameras captured the still image, which quickly became one of the defining visuals of the funeral. When he returned to his seat, the hall responded with sustained silence before breaking into respectful applause. The tribute had lasted only minutes, but it left a lasting impact on the audience, both inside the hall and across the nation. His closing words and final gesture provided the emotional bridge from grief to remembrance, ensuring that his son's legacy would be framed through love and conviction rather than only through tragedy. The sister's tribute begins. Following her father's tribute, Charlie Kirk's sister was invited to speak. Until this moment, she had remained entirely private, avoiding public statements during the week of mourning. Her presence at the podium drew immediate attention, as many anticipated that her perspective would provide a different but equally powerful dimension to the service. The hall remained silent as she began. Her tone contrasted with her father's steady delivery, carrying the immediacy of sibling loss rather than parental reflection. She spoke about growing up alongside Charlie, describing him not as a national figure, but as an older brother who had shaped her daily life. She recalled shared family moments, late-night conversations, small acts of encouragement, and the ways he pushed her to pursue her own path with confidence. Unlike her father, whose focus had been on values and legacy, her words highlighted personal bonds. She described Kirk as protective, sometimes stubborn, but always committed to his role within the family. These details humanized him further, reminding the audience that behind the headlines and the controversies stood a brother whose influence extended beyond public life. Her decision to speak also carried symbolic weight. It underscored that the family's grief was not limited to parents or spouse, but extended to siblings who had lived their entire lives in close connection. For many in the audience, her tribute emphasized that the tragedy had fractured not only a public movement, but also a private household. Observers noted the emotional balance of her remarks, deeply personal yet measured, heartfelt without becoming unstructured. The sister's opening statements established her as a central voice of the funeral, one that complemented and expanded the father's tribute while adding a perspective that was uniquely her own. The sister's core message. As her remarks continued, Charlie Kirk's sister moved beyond personal memories to articulate a broader message. Her central theme was the need to preserve her brother's legacy in ways that honored both his public work and his private character. She acknowledged that Kirk had been a polarizing figure, but stressed that within the family he was remembered for loyalty, generosity, and an unwavering belief in responsibility. She spoke directly to the audience about resilience. While her father had called for unity and restraint, her words carried the perspective of a sibling determined not to let grief silence her brother's influence. She urged listeners to consider Kirk's dedication to his mission as a challenge to live with conviction in their own lives. In doing so, she transformed her tribute from recollection to instruction, framing it as a call to action rather than simply a remembrance. Her comments also emphasized continuity. She described her brother as someone who saw family as the foundation of everything he pursued, suggesting that the family itself would now carry his values forward. This statement resonated strongly, as it presented the family not as victims defined by loss, but as active participants in shaping the narrative of his legacy. Analysts later noted that her message struck a balance between grief and determination. By combining emotional vulnerability with a clear vision, she gave the service its most forward-looking moment. Her words suggested that while Charlie Kirk's life had been cut short, the principles he embodied would not end with him. The sisters' core message was both personal and public, ensuring that her voice would stand alongside her father's as one of the defining tributes of the funeral. Public and media reaction to the tributes. The father's and sisters' tributes quickly became the focal point of the funeral coverage. Media outlets across the country highlighted their words, often playing clips repeatedly during broadcasts. Headlines emphasized the emotional weight of the family's remarks, framing them as the defining moments of the service. Analysts on both conservative and mainstream platforms noted that the tributes managed to transcend politics, shifting the focus from ideological debates to the human dimension of loss. Public reaction mirrored this emphasis. Supporters described the tributes as powerful and inspiring, praising the father's restraint and the sisters' determination. Social media platforms trended with clips and quotes, particularly the father's call to resist anger and the sisters' call to resilience. Even critics of Kirk's political views expressed respect for the family's composure, acknowledging the depth of their grief and the universality of their message. Faith communities amplified the tributes, weaving them into sermons and prayer gatherings in the days following the funeral. For many church leaders, the father's and sisters' remarks provided a framework for discussing grief, conviction, and unity. The emphasis on love over anger resonated in religious contexts, reinforcing the idea that the service carried moral lessons beyond its immediate political significance. International outlets also covered the funeral, presenting the tributes as reflections of American political culture's intersection with personal tragedy. Observers abroad noted how the event highlighted both division and the possibility of reconciliation through family voices. The wide coverage ensured that the father's and sisters' tributes would not remain confined to the funeral hall. Instead, they became part of the national dialogue, shaping the way Kirk's legacy would be remembered and reinforcing the family's role as central figures in the aftermath of the tragedy. A legacy defined by family tribute. By the conclusion of the funeral, one element stood above all others: the tributes delivered by Charlie Kirk's father and sister. Their words framed the service, offering both a personal farewell and a public statement that shaped how the nation interpreted the loss. While the presence of political leaders and dignitaries underscored Kirk's influence, it was the family's testimony that gave the event its defining meaning. The father's emphasis on restraint, unity, and conviction redirected the tone of the funeral away from political confrontation and toward reflection. His call to avoid anger resonated in a nation still reeling from the violence, presenting an alternative to outrage and retaliation. The sisters' remarks extended this theme, balancing grief with determination and presenting Kirk's values as a legacy to be carried forward. Together, their tributes created a complementary narrative, a life remembered not only for its public impact, but also for its private influence within the family. Observers concluded that these tributes would likely endure as the central memory of the event. Images of the father's hand resting on the casket and the sister's steady delivery circulated widely, reinforcing the idea that family grief had become the lens through which the nation would remember the tragedy. In the days following the funeral, analysts and commentators consistently returned to the same point: the service had elevated the family as both mourners and interpreters of legacy. Through their words, they transformed a moment of devastation into a platform for resilience, ensuring that Kirk's memory was tied not only to politics but also to love, unity, and conviction. The legacy of the funeral was thus sealed not by ceremony or attendance, but by the voices of those who knew him best.
Away from the worries of the world. I didn't make him feel guilty for being away too long or too much or getting home too late. I always told him, home is here for you and it'll be ready for you. And I made it into this place where he wanted to be as soon as possible when he was on the road. There was no keeping score between us. We were a team, working together for the same mission. I never wanted to be the one standing between Charlie and the task that God prepared for him, had set for him. And I knew Charlie would always do his best to help me with the same. My marriage with Charlie was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I know it was the best thing that ever happened to him as well. He wanted everyone to experience that joy. And that's what's so beautiful about God's design for marriage, is that everyone can. And I could talk endlessly about it, and years to come I will. But Charlie's mission above all was aimed directly at those who aren't married. He named his organization well. He knew things were not right with America, and especially with young people, and they needed a new direction. Charlie passionately wanted to reach and save the lost boys of the West, the young men who feel like they have no direction, no purpose, no faith, and no reason to live. The men wasting their lives on distractions, and the men consumed with resentment, anger, and hate. Charlie wanted to help them. He wanted them to have a home with Turning Point USA. And when he went onto campus, he was looking to show them a better path and a better life that was right there for the taking. He wanted to show them that. My husband, Charlie, he wanted to save young men just like the one who took his life. That young man. On the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him. I forgive him because it was what Christ did and is what Charlie would do. The answer to hate is not hate. The answer we know from the gospel is love, and always love. Love for our enemies and love for those who persecute us. The world needs Turning Point USA. It needs a group that will point young people away from the path of misery and sin. It needs something that will lead people away from hell in this world and in the next. It needs young people pointed in the direction of truth and beauty. And so I promise you today, every part of our work will become greater. I am tremendously honored to be the new CEO of Turning Point USA. I do not take that lightly. Charlie and I were united in purpose. His passion was my passion, and now his mission is my mission. Everything that Turning Point USA built through Charlie's vision and hard work, we will make 10 times greater through the power of his memory. Chapters will grow, thousands of new ones will be created. TPUSA Faith will add thousands of new pastors and congregations. And yes, campus events will continue. And we will continue to hold debates and dialogue. The First Amendment of our Constitution is the most human amendment. We are naturally talking beings, naturally believing beings. And the First Amendment protects our right to do both. No assassin will ever stop us from standing up to defend those rights, ever. Because when you stop the conversation, when you stop the dialogue, this is what happens. When we lose the ability and the willingness to communicate, we get violence. And as I stand here now and I look at this beautiful photo of my husband in front of me hanging in the stadium, I think of my husband 13 years ago. I hadn't met him yet. He was 18 years old, a man barely out of high school, running around the halls of the RNC without $1 in his pocket and a single contact in his phone. People who saw him said that he didn't know what he was doing, but he did. He did know what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was going to change the world, and he did. Charlie's life was a turning point for this country. It was a miracle. Let that miracle, that was Charlie's life, be your turning point as well. Choose prayer. Choose courage. Choose beauty. Choose adventure. Choose family. Choose a life of faith. Most importantly, choose Christ. I love you, Charlie, baby. And I will make you proud. God bless you all, and God bless America.